What happens when the warm, familiar glow of a morning television studio becomes an arena and casual conversation is sharpened into a weapon? What happens when public banter curdles into a private, methodical demolition, played out for an audience of millions, forcing one woman to choose between silent humiliation and a courage she never knew she possessed? The studio was a universe of controlled perfection, a constellation of high-wattage lights hung from the ceiling grid, bathing the set in a perpetual, shadowless noon. 3 cameras, sleek black predators on silent wheels, glided across the polished floor, their single red eyes glowing with an unblinking focus. The set itself was designed to soothe and welcome, plush sofas in calming shades of teal and grey, a low coffee table bearing mugs with the show's cheerful logo, and a vast digital screen behind the hosts that currently displayed a soft focus image of a sun-drenched meadow. In the tiered seating that rose into the darkness beyond the lights, a live studio audience, warmed up and coached on when to applaud, hummed with a quiet, expectant energy. They had come for light chatter, celebrity gossip, and relatable dilemmas, a comforting dose of daytime distraction. They were about to witness a blood sport. At the center of it all sat 4 women, a carefully curated tableau of modern femininity. There was the host, a consummate professional whose smile was both a welcome and a shield, her voice a smooth, practiced instrument for guiding conversations away from dangerous ledges. Beside her sat Jane, the seasoned journalist, her posture exuding a calm authority, her eyes sharp and analytical, missing nothing. And then there was Denise, who leaned forward with a coiled energy, a predator's stillness belying the storm within. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes, which were constantly scanning, searching for a weakness, a seam in someone's composure that she could pry open. Today, those eyes were fixed almost exclusively on the 4th woman, Katie. Katie was the guest panelist for the week, a writer known for her thoughtful and empathetic takes on modern life. She sat with a poised grace, but a close observer might have noticed the slight tension in her shoulders, the way she kept her hands neatly folded in her lap. She possessed a quiet dignity that in a world of loud opinions could easily be mistaken for fragility. To Denise, it looked like a target. The host, oblivious to the simmering undercurrent, launched the first segment with her signature polish. She swiveled to face the main camera, her expression a perfect blend of curiosity and concern. "A woman has opened up," she began, her voice resonating through the studio, about how, at the age of 38, she told her husband she would never sleep with him again. The audience murmured, a ripple of intrigued whispers. The host continued, laying out the details of the article, the woman's admission of a lifelong low libido, her love for her husband coexisting with a complete lack of physical desire, and the complex sacrifice that now defined their marriage. And celibacy, the host concluded, turning to her panel, is something that younger generations in particular are embracing more and talking about more. Her gaze swept across the desk, a practiced theatrical gesture. "Now, of course, Jane, you're our royal correspondent," a nod to Jane, who smiled wryly. Then the pivot. "Danza," she said, using the familiar, affectionate nickname for Denise, "you're our sex correspondent." The label hung in the air, a playful anointing that Denise accepted as her coronation. "Denise, what do you think?" A flicker of something predatory crossed Denise's face as she saw her cue on the auto cue. "I knew that was coming," she purred, a low, throaty sound that was both a joke and a boast. She shifted in her seat, owning the moment, the camera zooming in to capture her reaction. "I think it's interesting," she began, feigning deep thought. "And to be honest, this topic arose. I think—" She paused, letting the silence hang, then corrected herself with a conspiratorial lean towards the host. Okay, because Kay and I went for a quick knit and natter after—" She stopped abruptly, looking over at Katie with a saccharine smile. "No, we went for a little knit and natter after work yesterday." The use of the intimate phrase, the implication of a shared private gossip session, was the first move in her game. She was drawing a circle that included only herself and the host, subtly positioning Katie on the outside. And then we were talking about a couple that we knew some years ago who recently said to us that they have sex about 3 times a day. "Wow," the host breathed, playing her part perfectly. The audience let out a collective impressed sigh, but Denise wasn't looking at the host. Her eyes, sharp as glass shards, were locked on Katie. With a flick of her wrist and a dismissive little laugh, she delivered the first, seemingly playful jab. "And it's just, you don't." The silence that followed was infinitesimal, a mere crack in the studio's cheerful facade, but it was deafening. Katie flinched, a barely perceptible tightening of her jaw. Her polite smile remained fixed, but the light in her eyes dimmed for a fraction of a second. It was a direct hit, disguised as a casual aside. Jane shot a quick, concerned glance from Denise to Katie, her brow furrowing slightly. In the audience, the laughter was scattered and nervous. No one was quite sure if it was a joke. Denise, sensing her advantage, doubled down. She looked at Katie's frozen expression and added with a cruel, knowing smirk, "Yeah, we know you don't." The air thickened. The joke, if it ever was one, had landed with the thud of a thrown stone. It was no longer a general comment. It was an accusation, a public branding. Denise, having planted her flag, immediately pivoted back to the safety of gossip, her tone becoming breezy and light once more. Think we're gossiping. What can I say?" She laughed, a sound that didn't travel beyond her own lips. "The more you talk about it, you think, the less you do it. It's a bit like when you've got friends who are sort of all very zen and everything, and you think you're having a really, really bad time at the minute." She was painting a picture, creating a caricature of the passionless, the celibate, the secretly miserable, and with every stroke of her brush, she was painting it over Katie's image. She gestured towards the newspaper on the table. "But there is this lady today. Just because we said we don't really talk enough about celibate relationships." Again, her eyes found Katie, "because we think this particular relationship is celibate." The insinuation was thick and suffocating. She continued, "It's like people feel the need to say that they're having sex lots of times. Whereas actually, if it is your choice to be celibate, then it should be legit." The word choice was delivered with a cynical stress, implying that for some, it wasn't a choice at all, but a failing. She picked up the thread of the article again, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "This lady here, it's a kind of different edge to it, because she has always been asexual. She says she's never really been into it at all." She paused, letting the words settle, then turned her full, judgmental gaze on Katie and delivered her verdict. A pronouncement on a stranger that was clearly meant for the woman sitting opposite her. She should have had that conversation with him before they got married. The cruelty was breathtaking in its precision. The audience, which had been trying to keep up with the shifting tone, fell into a deep, uncomfortable quiet. This was no longer morning television. It felt like an interrogation. Katie, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes on her, finally spoke, her voice quiet but clear, attempting to steer the conversation back to a place of empathy. "Well, I think she was a virgin, and I think she thought it was all right for a bit, and then she realized that she wasn't." Denise's eyes widened in mock astonishment. She leaned back, a malicious delight spreading across her face. "You know a lot about this woman," she declared, her voice loud in the silent studio. The audience let out a few awkward titters. The implication was clear. You identify with her because you are her. Katie tried to deflect with self-deprecating humor, a shield against the relentless assault. "I know," she said, managing a weak smile. "Yeah, nobody would talk to me about it. I had to write into our own show." The joke fell into a void. Denise simply stared at her, unblinking. Feeling the need to clarify, to push back against the label being forced upon her, Katie added, No, I'm certainly not celibate, but okay," Denise cut in, waving her hand dismissively, as if Katie's denial was an amusing but irrelevant footnote. A strange, sly look entered her eyes. She leaned forward again, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial, almost obscene whisper that the boom mic picked up with crystalline clarity. "No, but I don't. Move around very much?" She held Katie's gaze, a smug, secret smile playing on her lips. "You know what I mean?" A wave of pure confusion and discomfort washed over the studio. The phrase was bizarre, laden with an unspoken, unpleasant meaning that no one could quite grasp, yet everyone felt. Katie stared back, her face a mask of polite incomprehension. No, I don't know what you mean," she said, her voice barely a whisper. The host, her face pale with alarm, jumped in immediately, her professional poise cracking for the first time. "Don't ask her what she means," she said, her voice tight with panic. Jane, sitting beside her, echoed the sentiment, her tone a low, urgent warning. Do not ask her what she means, but the damage was done. Denise had successfully derailed the conversation into a deeply personal and unsettling territory. She had created an in-joke to which only she held the punchline, leaving everyone else, especially Katie, in a state of bewildered distress. Seeing the chaos she had wrought, Denise quickly retreated to the topic at hand, but her point was now laced with the poison she had just administered. Anyway, the point being is, this lady has said to her husband, "I love you. I love cuddling you. I love sleeping in the same bed with you, but I'm done pretending that it's okay. So when you start to stir a bit, I don't want it anymore." The host, desperate to salvage the segment and find a foothold on higher ground, tried to reframe the issue as one of empowerment. "But that's quite empowering that she is saying, 'Look, this isn't something I want.'" She trailed off, looking to the other panelists for support. The conversation briefly found a moment of sanity as they discussed the complexities of consent and desire within a marriage. Jane, ever the voice of reason, was asked if a marriage could thrive without intimacy. As she prepared to answer, Denise saw another opportunity. "But we're talking about not necessarily old people," Jane began. And Denise, with a sharp pointed finger aimed directly at her, interjected with a snide, "Thanks, Denise," a sarcastic barb so out of place it drew a collective gasp. Jane, startled, shot back, "Any pointing at me?" before composing herself. Jane delivered a thoughtful, nuanced take. "As long as you're on the same page, right?" she reasoned, her calm voice a balm on the tense atmosphere. "So I think if one person isn't part of that pact and is thinking, well, I desire you, but what you're saying is you don't desire me, I think that's problematic. It is hurtful." Then she made the mistake of trying to defend Katie, inadvertently dragging her back into the line of fire. "But like Katie said, she doesn't desire anybody. But I don't. With that wasn't a quote from me," Katie interjected, a flash of frustration breaking through her composure. The misrepresentation, however well-intentioned, felt like another layer of the false narrative being woven around her. Jane, realizing her error, quickly backtracked. I know. Denise watched this exchange with the satisfaction of a pyromaniac watching a fire spread. She saw her chance to fan the flames. "But why do we get edgy about being, accused of being celibate?" she mused, adopting a tone of intellectual curiosity that was utterly disingenuous. "There is this kind of feeling that, the more sex you have, the better it is. And people who are not having sex, there is something," Katie, seizing the chance to elevate the discourse, cut in with a point of genuine substance. "I think you can be celibate and very intimate," she stated, her voice regaining its steady, thoughtful rhythm. "I don't think intimacy and celibacy are necessarily separate. I think you can be intimate and still be celibate, because intimacy isn't just about sex. It's about, emotional connection." It was a beautiful, intelligent point, but it was lost in the toxic fog Denise had created. The host, seeing a life raft, grabbed onto a new trend. "Celibacy influencers now!" she announced with forced brightness, trying to pivot to a younger, less personal demographic. They spoke of energy transfer and the choice to abstain from casual sex. A brief, shallow paddle in safer waters. Jane tried to connect it to the idea of building intimacy before physicality, as seen on reality shows. "If you take the sex out of the situation, you might actually get to know somebody a bit better," she suggested. "But if the sex is off the table forever, I think that's a problem," Denise shot back, her one-track mind returning to her central theme of lack and failure. "If you're not on the same page..." "Right. Okay, all right," the host said, her voice strained. The segment was over. She had survived. With a tight, false smile, she turned to the camera. "Well, moving on. But before I do," she added, a sudden bizarre note of glee in her voice, "it's with great joy that I apologize to any lip readers for Denise's language." Denise looked genuinely bewildered. "What did I say?" "We don't want to know," the host chirped, waving it away as if it were a naughty but harmless bit of fun, a grotesque misreading of the deliberate, sustained cruelty that had just unfolded. The audience, confused, offered a smattering of weak applause. Katie sat in stunned silence, the target of an attack that was now being repackaged as a light-hearted gaffe. The first battle was over, and the air was thick with the bitter smoke of unspoken aggression. The worst, however, was yet to come. The host, desperate to clear the toxic air, plunged into the next segment with a frantic, almost manic energy. A vibrant image flashed onto the giant screen behind the panel, the cover of Time magazine, featuring the handsome, smiling face of actor Jonathan Bailey. The studio lights seemed to brighten, the colors on the screen popping with cheerful intensity. It was a lifeline, a return to the safe, shallow waters of celebrity news. "Star of Wicked and Bridgerton, Jonathan Bailey," the host announced, her voice a caricature of showbiz enthusiasm, "has appeared on the cover of Time in a list of the world's most influential rising stars. But something else has got people's attention." She paused for dramatic effect, leaning towards her panelists with a playful, conspiratorial grin. "Can you see it? Can you spot it?" Her eyes landed on Katie, a seemingly innocent choice. In reality, it was a lamb being led to the slaughter. "What's leaping out to you there, Katie?" Katie, grateful for the change of subject, leaned forward to study the image. She scanned the actor's charming smile, his confident posture, and then her eyes fell to the bottom of the frame, where one of his bare feet was propped up in the foreground, slightly out of focus. It was an unusual artistic choice for a magazine cover, and she gave an honest, immediate answer. "His foot," she said with a light, easy laugh. "The foot in the foreground there." The moment the words left her mouth, she felt the atmosphere shift. It was as if she had walked, blindfolded, directly into a carefully laid snare. Denise, who had been sitting back with a look of feigned boredom, suddenly straightened up. Her face, which had been relaxed, hardened into a mask of severe judgment. The playful glint in her eye was gone, replaced by a cold, hard light. This was not a spontaneous reaction. It was a planned ambush. She'd been waiting for this exact opening. "Listen," Denise began, her voice low and resonant, taking on the tone of a preacher delivering a sermon. She wasn't speaking to Katie anymore. She was addressing the world, positioning herself as an arbiter of self-respect and personal standards. "I'm a massive believer in anything you can't control. Let go of it and accept it." A noble sentiment, delivered as the preamble to a character assassination. "But everything you can control," she continued, her voice gaining a sharp accusatory edge as her eyes bored into Katie. "Please make the best of yourself." She pointed a perfectly manicured finger at the screen, but her indictment was aimed squarely across the table. "And that foot," she spat, the words dripping with contempt, "is not giving the best." The host, sensing danger, tried to interject with a nervous laugh. "What's wrong with his foot?" Denise ignored her completely. She was in her element now, a prosecutor laying out an irrefutable case against an unnamed defendant. "That foot looks like it would make a noise if you tapped it," she declared, her lip curling in disgust. A few people in the audience gasped. This was no longer about a celebrity's photo. The personal venom was too palpable. "No, it doesn't," Jane murmured, trying to diffuse the situation, but Denise was relentless. "It looks dry," she snapped. "It looks solid. It needs a pumice." She looked directly at Katie, whose face had gone pale. Every word was a poisoned dart. The foot on the screen was a proxy, a stand-in for every perceived imperfection Denise had decided Katie embodied. "It is a picture. It looks like he's been running around the garden." Jane, horrified by the viciousness of the attack, tried to reclaim the conversation, to pull it back from the brink. "I tell you with Jane and I speak for both of us," she began, hoping to use humor as a shield. "Don't bring me into this," Jane said immediately, her voice sharp with warning. She wanted no part in this public flaying, but Denise would not be deterred. She steamrolled right over Jane's objection, twisting her words to create a false alliance. "Yes, I am," she insisted, "because you told me his foot was not the first thing we were drawn to in that photograph." She then widened her gaze, challenging the entire room, daring anyone to disagree with her manufactured consensus. "And I defy anybody to say otherwise." She clapped her hands together with a sharp, final sound. "Thank you. Carry on." It was a stunning display of manipulation, silencing dissent by fabricating support. Katie, meanwhile, tried to find her footing on the rapidly crumbling ground. She attempted to praise the actor, to steer the conversation toward his positive attributes, her voice trembling slightly. "Yeah, thank you, absolutely. He's got a lovely smile. He really does, and that was certainly what drew me to him." Her words were a desperate plea for decency, an appeal to focus on kindness instead of criticism. It was a plea Denise was determined to ignore. Katie, fumbling for a way to connect, to normalize the bizarre conversation, turned the topic to her own life, a mistake born of a desire to appease her tormentor. "But yeah, I don't know if I've ever... so does Richie have to sort of look after his feet?" she asked Jane, trying to turn the topic of foot care into a relatable, domestic anecdote. This was the opening Denise needed to deliver the final, most humiliating blows. The conversation devolved into a grotesque discussion of foot maintenance, with Denise describing in graphic detail the metal cheese grater she bought her husband for Christmas. In the shower, she explained with relish, as Katie and the audience listened in stunned horror. "You keep that in the shower, and every time the foot is moist, you then just grate down the... Don't do it dry, because you could bleed." The imagery was visceral and ugly, and it served to underscore her central thesis, that there was a correct way to maintain a body, a relationship, a life, and that Katie was failing on all counts. Jane, trying to escape the madness, offered a simple, logical statement. "See, I like feet because they keep me standing upright and I don't fall over." Denise pounced on the word maintenance. She reframed her obsession not as a fetish, but as a fundamental tenet of self-worth. I think we all should look after our feet, and I think that's important." And then, in a breathtaking non sequitur, she turned the weapon of maintenance on Katie one last time, this time using a story from earlier that morning. But you even got the ick this morning because your husband had chips," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. The sudden shift was dizzying. Katie, thrown off balance, could only confirm the bizarre accusation. "Oh, we had chips at 9 a.m. in the cafe." Denise leaned back, her face a mask of triumphant pity. She recounted the story to the bewildered audience as if it were evidence of a terminal decline in Katie's marriage and personal standards. "Chips at 9 a.m., she repeated, letting the absurdity hang in the air. "And I said to him, is that where the marriage has gone? Chips at 9 a.m. in a cafe?" A woman in the third row gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The cruelty was no longer veiled. It was naked, brutal, and deeply personal. Jane, looking utterly appalled, tried to mock the ridiculousness of it. She was grateful for his feet and a plate of chips, and she's done. No, Denise cried, her voice rising with sanctimonious fury. This wasn't a joke to her. It was the crux of her entire argument. Because I thought you can't stop making the best of yourself just because I'm now trapped. The word hung in the air, a Freudian slip of staggering proportions. Trapped. In that single, unguarded word, the entire motivation behind her cruelty was laid bare. Her relentless attacks on Katie's perceived lack of passion, her obsession with superficial maintenance, her judgment of a simple breakfast of chips. It was all a projection of her own profound unhappiness, her own feeling of being trapped in a life that had not met her expectations. The studio was deathly quiet. Everyone understood. They had just witnessed not a critique of Katie, but a confession from Denise. In that moment of ringing silence, something inside Katie finally shifted. She had absorbed the insults, deflected the insinuations, and weathered the humiliation with a grace that bordered on superhuman. But that last word, trapped, had changed everything. It was no longer an attack to be endured. It was a tragedy to be witnessed. And with that realization, her fear dissolved, replaced by a profound, clarifying calm. She took a slow, deliberate breath. She unclasped her hands, resting them gently on the table in front of her. She straightened her back, and when she lifted her head, her eyes were clear and steady. The trembling was gone. The hurt was gone. All that remained was a quiet, unshakable strength. The audience, sensing the tectonic shift in the room's energy, leaned forward as one, holding their breath. The cameras, as if guided by an invisible hand, slowly pushed in, framing her face. When she spoke, her voice was not loud, but it filled the entire studio, cutting through the toxic haze left by Denise's tirade. It was the voice of a woman who had found her footing on the highest ground. "We were talking about feet," she began, her tone measured and calm, acknowledging the absurd topic that had been used to bludgeon her. "We were talking about a picture of a man's foot on a magazine cover. We were talking about pumice stones and making the best of yourself." She paused, letting her eyes travel from the host to Jane and finally to Denise, holding her gaze without malice, but with a powerful, unnerving clarity. "I've been sitting here listening to what making the best of yourself is supposed to mean," she continued, her voice gaining a quiet resonance. "Apparently, it means not having dry feet. It means not letting your husband eat chips in a cafe at 9 in the morning. It means presenting a perfect, polished, maintained surface to the world at all times. It's about control. Control of everything you possibly can, because, perhaps, you feel you have no control over the things that truly matter." Denise flinched as if struck. A murmur swept through the audience, a sound of dawning comprehension and affirmation. "But I have to wonder," Katie went on, her gaze now widening to include the cameras. "The millions of people watching at home. If we're so busy judging the surface, the feet, the breakfast choices, the frequency of intimacy that we deem correct, that we've completely forgotten what's underneath." Her voice, imbued with a newfound moral authority, began to build. "Making the best of yourself isn't about the hardness of your heels. It's about the softness of your heart. It's not about what you grate away from your body, but what you build up in your soul. It is about kindness. It's about empathy. It's about having the grace to celebrate a person's smile instead of dissecting their feet. It's about having the wisdom to understand that a shared plate of chips at 9 in the morning might not be a sign that a marriage has gone somewhere terrible. But maybe, just maybe, it's a sign of a comfortable, joyful, authentic love that doesn't need to perform for anyone's approval." The audience was completely still, captivated. The production crew in the gallery stood frozen, headsets on, watching their monitors in awe. The host and Jane stared at Katie, their faces a mixture of shock and profound respect. Denise sat rigid in a chair, her smug mask crumbling to reveal the panicked, defensive anger beneath. "We started this show talking about a woman brave enough to tell her husband the truth about her own body, her own desires," Katie said, her voice now ringing with passion. "We live in a world that is so terrified of that kind of honesty. We are so terrified of anything that looks like imperfection or vulnerability or a deviation from the script we're all supposed to be following. And so we lash out, we judge. We use our platforms, our words, our whispers, to tear people down, to make them feel small, to make them feel less than, because it makes us feel powerful in our own quiet desperation." She finally broke her gaze with the camera and looked directly at Denise. Not with anger, but with something that looked almost like pity. True strength isn't found in cruelty. It's not found in pointing out another person's flaws to distract from your own. True strength is in the courage to be kind in a world that is often not. It's in the ability to see a human being and not a checklist of imperfections. That, she concluded, her voice dropping to a powerful resonant hush, is what it truly means to make the best of yourself. For a long moment, the studio was suspended in a state of absolute silence. It was a silence filled with the weight of every word she had spoken. Then a single person in the back row began to clap. Another joined in, then another and another, until the entire studio erupted in a wave of thunderous, sustained applause. It wasn't the polite, prompted applause of a television audience. It was a raw, emotional, and overwhelming ovation. People were on their feet, some wiping tears from their eyes. They were not just clapping for Katie. They were clapping for decency, for kindness, for the simple, profound truth she had just spoken. Denise was left utterly exposed, isolated in a storm of approval for the woman she had tried to destroy. Her face was a canvas of conflicting emotions: fury, humiliation, disbelief. She opened her mouth to speak, to offer a defense or a sarcastic retort, but no words came. The applause simply washed over her, drowning her, rendering her insignificant. The producer's voice, tinny and distant in the host's earpiece, was telling them to go to a commercial break. The host, her eyes shining with unshed tears, reached across the table and placed a hand on Katie's arm. "Thank you," she mouthed silently over the din, but Katie's journey wasn't quite over. As the applause finally began to subside, she looked once more into the lens of the center camera, the little red light that was her connection to the world outside this room. A deep, soulful sadness entered her eyes, the look of someone who had won a battle she should never have had to fight. "We have a choice. Every single day," she said, her voice soft but carrying an immense weight. "With every word we speak, especially when we have a microphone in front of us. We can use our words to create wounds, or we can use them to heal. We can build cages for each other with judgment and scorn, or we can build bridges with understanding. What we saw here today, it was a choice." With that, she slowly, gracefully pushed her chair back. She stood up, smoothing down her dress with a quiet composure that was breathtaking to behold. She gave a small, sad nod to the host and to Jane, completely ignoring the shell-shocked figure of Denise. Then, with the entire studio watching in rapt silence, she turned and walked away from the brightly lit desk, her footsteps echoing softly on the polished floor. She didn't storm off in anger. She simply exited, leaving behind an empty chair that was a more powerful condemnation than any shout could ever be. She walked through the shadows at the edge of the set and disappeared, a figure of immense dignity, leaving a scene of utter moral devastation in her wake. The cameras remained, holding on the empty seat, a silent testament to the void created by cruelty and the enduring power of grace under fire.